Hello again. So when we last heard from Abel, he wasn't with Amanda, and that was I think for me, one of the scariest, saddest things about his predicament. He had seemed to have weathered a big storm, and he had somehow managed to grab onto a raft which took him across a river. So now we're at chapter 3. Abel slept for 14 hours. When his eyes opened, he was startled to find he was not where he ought to be, that is, in bed with his wife, Amanda. There was no wife, there were no walls. There was only a dazzling brightness in a landscape such as he had never seen. It was mid-afternoon. As always after a hurricane, the atmosphere was crystal clear. He was now able to see his boat, the piece of board with the rusty nail that had probably saved his life. It was lodged in the uppermost branches of a tree that was mainly submerged in the river. And I know you know the word submerged from science. Do you remember that? Above was an endless cerulean blue, a kind of blue. Below, water flowed swiftly, sparkling like champagne in the sun. Another metaphor. The water was all around him, but some distance to his left and some distance to his right, more trees stuck up out of the water, and beyond the trees on both sides, the ground rose into wooded hills. Turning around, he saw behind him the waterfall over which he had plunged. His trees seemed to be in the middle of the river. There was no doubt he was on an island, just like in the title, Abel's Island. So now we've got there. The rain must have ended shortly after he fell asleep, and during that time the flood had crested. It had already subsided some, or else he would not be as far above the water as he was. So the flood went up really high, but now it's gone down a bit. He would be able to descend to solid ground when the river fell farther. He stood up, stretching, and winced. All his muscles ached. He had to sit down again. He wished Amanda was with him, or better yet, he with her. As far as he could tell, apart from the trees, he was the only living thing between the horizons. He let out his loudest, "Halloo!" then listened. There was no response, not even an echo. The state of his clothes disturbed him. Damp and lumpy, they no longer had style. That would be corrected as soon as possible. He stared into the distance and speculated. They're all wondering where I am, of course. Many I don't even know are wondering. It's certainly gotten around that Abelard Hassam de Chirico Flint of the Mossville Flints is missing. Oh, again, such a fancy long name. I think he has a pretty good opinion of himself, and he's not used to having something like this happen to him. So it's going to be even more shocking than it would be for some people. It was distressing to consider the misery and anxiety his absence was causing those who cared. Search parties were surely out, but they wouldn't be anywhere near him. How could they even begin to guess what had happened? That, by freak chance, rain had formed a rivulet around a sort of boat he had boarded accidentally? That the rivulet, swelling, had taken him into a stream? The stream had carried him into a river, the river had rushed him over a waterfall, and that he was now where he was, on his boat at the top of a tree, on an island, in whatever river this was. When the water subsided, he would descend and go home, and what a story he'd have to tell. Meanwhile, he wished he had something to eat. A mushroom omelet, for example, with buttered garlic toast. Being hungry in addition to being marooned like this was really a bit too much. Absent-mindedly, he nibbled at a twig on his branch. Cherry birch, one of his favorite flavors. The familiar taste made him feel a little more at home on his roost in the middle of nowhere. He munched on the bark of a tender green shoot, his cheek filled with the pulp and the juice. He was eating. He sat there, vaguely smug, convinced that he had the strength, the courage, and the intelligence to survive. His eyes glazed over, and he returned to sleep. That's the end of chapter 3.